floated around. And maybe the biggest one is a piece of legislation called the SSI Restoration Act. It's designed to attack that income shortfall we just talked about head-on.
And this proposal is getting a lot of attention. In the source material we looked at, one analyst put it pretty bluntly, saying the SSI Restoration Act, in my opinion, is a really, really good one. It checks literally all the boxes. So it's seen as this complete fix, not just some tiny little patch.
So what are these boxes that it checks? Well, first and foremost, the Act wants to raise monthly benefits to 100% of the federal poverty line. That means, boom, an instant $337 a month raise for someone getting the max benefit. And this part is crucial. It would then tie or index those benefits so they automatically go up with the poverty line every year. That way, this gap can never open up again. The Act also tackles the marriage penalty, which can hurt married couples. And it wants to seriously raise those ancient asset limits, which we're going to talk about next. Okay, reality check time. This is really, really important to understand. The SSI Restoration Act is still just a proposal. Right now, it has not been passed by Congress. It's been introduced, it's being talked about, but it is not the law of the land. But, a bigger check is only half the story. There's another huge problem that's kind of baked into the system right now, and it has everything to do with saving money. Okay, so the asset limits for SSI, that's how much money you can have saved up, are stuck in a time warp. They haven't been updated in decades. Right now, the limit for one person is just $2,000. I mean, think about that. Your car breaks down, your fridge dies, you have one unexpected medical bill, that can wipe you out completely. It basically makes it impossible to build any kind of real safety net. So the proposed fix for this is, well, it's dramatic. The asset limit for an individual would jump from $2,000 all the way up to $10,000. And for a couple, it would go from $3,000 to $20,000. I mean, that is a night and day difference. Let's just pause on that individual number for a second. Going from $2,000 to $10,000, that's a 500% increase. We are not talking about a small tweak here. This is a massive shift in policy, basically admitting that the financial world of today is nothing like it was when these old limits were set. And what does that really mean for someone's life? It's not just about the numbers. It's about security. It's about having that peace of mind that comes from knowing you have a rainy day fund. It means you could actually save for an emergency without that constant fear of losing the very benefits you need to survive. Okay, so we've got these two huge ideas on the table, one to boost monthly income and one to raise the savings limit. But what does it all mean? How does a plan like this go from being an idea to being a reality? Well, it all comes down to the process in Washington. First, lawmakers have to introduce the bills, which, they've already done. After that, the bills have to get debated in committees and then eventually get voted on by both the House and the Senate. If, and that's a big if, a bill passes, then it goes to the Social Security Administration to actually put the changes into effect. But it's key to remember where we are right now. These are all still just proposals on paper. All right, so let's just do a quick recap of the whole shebang. We're talking about 4 big things. 1, bigger checks, with that $337 monthly boost to get up to the poverty line. 2, higher savings with that 500% jump in the asset limit. 3, fairer rules, getting rid of that penalty for married couples. And 4, future-proofing the system by tying benefits to the poverty line so this whole mess never happens again. When you step back and look at it, these proposals are really a total rethinking of what SSI is and what it does. They're trying to bring it back to its original promise of being a real anti-poverty safety net. But the million-dollar question remains, is there enough political will to make these big plans a new reality for the millions of Americans who rely on it? And that's what we'll all be watching.
When you've worked your whole life, you expect retirement to be about some well-earned security, not constant stress. But for millions of Americans living on a fixed income, rising costs are creating this impossible squeeze. Today, we're going to dig into that reality and look at a couple of major legislative proposals that are designed to try and bridge that very gap. So let's kick things off with the number that's really at the heart of this whole conversation.
Here it is, $1,905. That is the average Social Security benefit paid out every single month. And for billions of people, this isn't just some number on a statement. It's everything. It's the total amount they have to cover every single expense.
So where does that $1,900 actually go? Well, as you can see here, most of it is gone almost immediately. The absolute essentials, we're talking housing, healthcare, food, getting around, and keeping the lights on, they eat up a whopping 88% of that average benefit. That leaves just a tiny 12% sliver for literally everything else: clothes, an emergency, household goods, any kind of quality of life. I mean, it is a budget with basically zero wiggle room.
Okay, so what can actually be done about this? Well, let's dive into the first big proposal that's aiming to tackle this head-on. It's called the Social Security Expansion Act, and it's designed to provide some direct, immediate relief.
The idea behind this act is really simple. It's not some complicated new program. There are no vouchers or anything like that. The core proposal is just a direct, across-the-board increase for every single person who gets Social Security.
And this is the magic number, an extra $200 a month. That might not sound like a fortune, but it adds up to $2,400 more a year. Now, think back to that budget we just looked at. For someone in that position, this is a huge deal. It could be the difference between having to choose which bill to pay and, well, having a little peace of mind.
Now, the Act is about more than just a one-time boost. It also changes how future cost of living adjustments are calculated. It would switch to something called the CPIE, which is basically a way of measuring inflation that's more tuned in to what seniors actually spend their money on, especially healthcare. So how would we pay for it? The plan is to apply the payroll tax to all income over $250,000. The goal here is to give immediate help while also making sure the whole program stays stable for the long haul.
All right, so beyond Social Security, there's another really important program out there for some of our most vulnerable citizens. So the second big proposal we're looking at is the SSI Restoration Act. This one focuses on modernizing and improving supplemental security income.
So what is SSI exactly? Well, think of it as a federal safety net. It gives a basic monthly income to adults and children who have significant disabilities, and also to seniors over 65 who have very limited income and resources. It's a genuine lifeline for almost 8 million people.
But the reality of SSI right now, it's pretty stark. The maximum benefit for one person is over $100 below the federal poverty line. And get this, the asset limits, that's how much a person can have in savings to even qualify, is $2,000. That limit has not been updated since 1992. 1992!
So, the SSI Restoration Act tries to fix these things directly. First, it would raise benefits up to the federal poverty line, finally. Second, it would seriously update those ancient asset limits so people could actually save a little for an emergency without getting kicked off the program. And third, it would let people who are able to work part-time keep more of their earnings. So the whole point is to both provide more and penalize people less.
Okay, we've talked about the policies, we've looked at the numbers, the different acts, but to really get what's at stake here, we need to bring this all down to the kitchen table, where real people are making tough decisions every single day.
So let's just ask the question. What does an extra $200 a month from that Social Security proposal actually look like in someone's day-to-day life? How does it really change the choices they have to make?
Let's meet Margaret. She's a 72-year-old retiree. In the before column, you can see her budget is incredibly tight. After she covers the absolute basics, she has just $120 left for the whole month. Now look at the after column. With that extra $200, her leftover cash more than doubles to $250. And we're not talking about luxuries here. This is money for better groceries, like the fresh fruit and vegetables her doctor says she should be eating. It completely transforms her budget from a constant state of crisis to one that has just a little bit of breathing room.
And that quote, that really gets to the core of it all, doesn't it? This isn't just about balancing a spreadsheet. It's about restoring a person's dignity. It's about ending those impossible choices that millions of people like Margaret have to face month after month.
This all brings us to a much bigger idea. Because while these policies are obviously crucial for financial security, they also touch on a deeper question about how we, as a society, really value the lives and the contributions of our older generations.
A person's life isn't measured in dollars and cents, right? It's measured in wisdom, in the communities they helped build, the families they raised. A person's true worth is defined by their character and what they gave to the world. And the policies we've been talking about are really just tools to make sure that financial stress in your later years doesn't get to overshadow a lifetime of value.
So we'll end with this thought. These policies are about creating security, but they point to a much larger question for all of us to think about. In a world that seems so focused on financial metrics, how do we truly honor and measure a lifetime of contribution? It's a question that really goes beyond politics and gets right to the core of what we value.
So let's talk about something you've probably heard a lot about, this idea of giving every single person on Social Security an extra $200 a month. I mean, on the surface, it sounds amazing, right? A huge boost for millions of people. But, as we're about to find out, when you dig into the details, it gets a whole lot more complicated. All right, let's get into it.
You know, this one quote really just sums up the whole thing perfectly. It's a plan that comes from a really good place, trying to help folks who depend on Social Security. But it's also got this giant, fundamental flaw that makes it, well, almost impossible to actually do. So the big question we're going to tackle here is, what's the good part? And what's the really, really flawed part? And maybe, just maybe, is there a better way to do it?
So, first things first, where did this idea even come from? Because it's not just some rumor bouncing around online. Nope, it actually comes from real legislative proposals that have been kicked around for years. Let's break down what this plan is really all about.
Okay, so this whole idea is a huge piece of something called the Social Security Expansion Act. Now, this act has a lot in it, but the part that gets all the headlines, the part everyone talks about, is that permanent $200 a month raise in benefits. And it's important to note, this isn't some brand new idea. A temporary version was talked about back in 2020, but this proposal, this one wants to make that raise a permanent part of Social Security.
Now let's be super clear about what this means for an individual. That $200 every month adds up to an extra $2,400 over a year. I mean, for anyone on a fixed income, that is a life-changing amount of money. Seriously, that could be the difference between just scraping by and actually having some breathing room. And the big promise here is that everyone, every single person getting a Social Security check gets this money. An extra $2,400 a year. Sounds great, doesn't it? But this right here is where we bump into the other half of that quote we started with, the massively flawed part. And it all boils down to one thing, the absolutely staggering cost of making that promise to everybody. When you start running the numbers, you see the real problem.
First, you have to wrap your head around just how massive the Social Security program is. We are talking about roughly 72.5 million people getting a check every month. And that's not just retirees. This includes people on disability, it includes survivors, it includes spouses. It's a huge, diverse group of Americans who count on that money.
Okay, so what happens when you multiply those 72.5 million people by an extra $200? The math is simple, but the answer is, well, it's pretty stunning. It would cost an extra $14.5 billion. And that's not for a year. That's every single month. That's an enormous new expense that has to be covered every 30 days.
And when you stretch that out over a full year, the true size of the price tag just hits you, $174 billion. Just to put that into perspective, the government's already paying out over $1.3 trillion a year in benefits. This would add another $174 billion on top of that, every single year. For a lot of lawmakers, that number stops the conversation cold, especially since the Social Security Trust Fund is already being used to cover current payments.
And this gets us to the real, logical heart of the issue. The cost is so huge because the plan is for everyone, no exceptions, which forces us to ask a really important question. Is this the smartest way to spend that money? Does the person getting the absolute maximum benefit need this raised just as badly as the person getting the absolute minimum?
And here it is. This is the big flaw, laid out for everyone to see. Under this plan, someone who is already getting, say, $4,000 a month from Social Security gets the exact same $200 raise as someone who is really struggling on less than $1,000 a month. Now, don't get me wrong, an extra $200 is nice for anybody, but it's not really needed by people at the top end of the scale, and that untargeted approach is what makes the plan so expensive, and frankly, what makes a lot of people say it just doesn't make sense.
So, if the Give It to Everyone plan is way too expensive and not very efficient, what's the alternative? Well, this is where the idea of targeting comes in. Instead of a blanket raise for all, what if we focus that money on the people who need it the most? Let's check out a couple of much more realistic options.
We can really break this down into two simple, logical ideas. The first one, let's call it the half plan, would give that $200 raise only to people whose monthly check is at or below the national average. Then there's a second, even more focused idea, the poverty line plan, which would send that money only to those whose benefits are so low that they're at or below the federal poverty line. And right here, you can see just how dramatically the money changes when you start targeting it. The universal plan, we know, is for all 72.5 million people and costs $174 billion a year. But look at the half plan. By focusing on about half the people, around 36 million, the cost drops to about $85 billion. And then, with the poverty line plan, targeting the 12 million lowest income folks, the cost plummets to just $36 billion a year.
So this is the key takeaway. Just by being a little smarter about who gets the money, you can slash the cost of the whole thing. Moving to the half plan cuts the price tag by more than half. And going to the super targeted poverty line plan, that reduces the cost by almost 80%. All of a sudden, you're talking about numbers that are way, way more manageable, both financially and politically.
So all this brings us to the final, and let's be honest, probably the most important question. Could any of this actually happen? I mean, a plan is just a plan until it becomes a law. How would politicians in Washington actually look at these different proposals? Well, it really all comes down to the simple math of cost versus impact.
Look, if you walk into a lawmaker's office with a plan that costs $174 billion extra a year for a system that's already under strain, that conversation is probably going to be pretty short. They'll just say it's not going to happen. But if you walk in with a plan that costs $85 billion, or even better, $36 billion, and you can show that every single one of those dollars is going to the people struggling the most, well, that's a completely different conversation. That's a plan you can actually defend.
And that's the political reality of it, right? It's pretty easy to vote no on a massive, unfocused spending bill. It's a whole lot harder to stand up and vote against the plan specifically designed to lift 12 million of our most vulnerable seniors and disabled citizens out of poverty. The moral argument there is just so much more powerful, which makes that super targeted plan the most likely to ever get any real momentum.
So, we end up right back where we started. The idea of a $200 raise is a good one at its core, but giving it to everyone is a deeply flawed approach. The numbers don't lie, a targeted plan is just far more realistic and efficient. But that leaves us with one final big question. We have a logical path that could provide real, meaningful help to millions. The question is, in today's political world, is logic enough to actually get something done for the people who need it the most?
You know, have you ever really stopped to think about what a couple $100s a month actually means? For a lot of us, it might be a few dinners out, maybe a new gadget, something like that. But for millions of Americans living on a fixed income, it is a completely different story. It's not about luxuries. It's the razor-thin line between constant grinding stress and a life with some actual security and dignity. So today, we're going to break down the profound, truly life-altering impact of just $200 a month.
So let's just start with that basic question. What can $200 really buy? And I'm not talking about abstract economic theories here. We're talking about real, tangible things, the essentials that people need just to get by, to live with a basic level of comfort.
And when you look at it like this, it really hits home. That extra $200 could mean 40 gallons of milk, or 100 loaves of bread to keep the pantry stocked. Think about this. It could cover 3 full months of basic internet. I mean, in today's world, that's not a luxury, that's a lifeline to family, to information, to telehealth. Or how about this? It could mean paying for 10 doctor's copays without having to panic and dip into the grocery money. It could be 20 gallons of heating oil to keep the house warm in the winter. These aren't wants, right? These are the absolute building blocks of a stable, secure life.
Okay, but here's the rub. Here's the core of the problem. While a $200 increase would be completely transformative, the reality for most seniors is, well, it's very different. The official benefit increases, what we call cost of living adjustments, or COLAs, they are just not keeping up with how fast real-world costs are exploding. And this creates a really dangerous and frankly ever-widening gap.
And this chart, wow, it just lays the disconnect out there perfectly. Just look at these projected numbers for 2025. The official cost of living adjustment, that tiny little bar, it's 2.5%. That's the small bump in benefits that's supposed to help with inflation. But in that exact same period, look what's happening to essential costs. Average housing costs for seniors, they're jumping 5.8%. And healthcare costs, they're soaring by 6.5%. I mean, you don't need to be a math genius to see the massive problem here. Seniors are falling further and further behind, month after month.
And if you want to see what this looks like for a real person, let's talk about Maria. She's 78. She relies entirely on her Social Security. So that 2.5% COLA increase, for her, it worked out to an extra $39 a month. $39. But then you add it all up. Her rent went up, her utility bills are higher, food costs more, her prescriptions cost more, her essential expenses shot up by $201. So now do the math. She's left with a $162 deficit every single month, just to stay where she was the year before. She's actually getting poorer, even though she got a quote-unquote raise. To really get the human cost of this financial squeeze, let's follow the story of a woman named Eleanor. She's 74, and before her income changed, her life was basically a masterclass in financial anxiety. Honestly, her budget tells you everything you need to know.
So this is her reality, right here on the screen. Eleanor's total monthly income from Social Security is $1,750. Now, her essential, non-negotiable costs, we're talking rent, utilities, groceries, Medicare, prescriptions, and just basic transportation, that all adds up to $1,650. That leaves her with just $100. $100 for everything else. A new pair of sneakers when hers were out, a car repair, a birthday gift for her grandkid, any unexpected medical bill. Forget it. That is an impossibly thin margin for error.
And you have to understand, living this way isn't just about being frugal or clipping coupons. It is a life defined by constant, gnawing stress. It means waking up every single morning with that knot in your stomach, already running the numbers in your head. It means having to make impossible choices, like, do I refill the prescription that helps with my arthritis, or do I make sure I have enough food to last the week? This isn't just a budget, it's a blueprint for anxiety.
But then, something changed for Eleanor, and this is where the story really pivots. We're moving from the problem to the solution, and we get to see how one simple catalyst can completely rewrite a person's daily existence.
And this was it. This was the catalyst. An additional $200 per month? It's not a lottery win, right? It's not some huge fortune. It's a modest, consistent increase that acted as an incredibly powerful turning point, and it shifted her entire financial and emotional reality.
So now take a look at her budget with that extra $200. Her income is now $1,950. And look at where that money goes. It's so telling. She can now increase her grocery budget by $50. That means she can afford fresh fruits and vegetables, things that help her manage her diabetes better. She can spend an extra $50 on her prescriptions, which means she can now afford all the medications her doctor prescribed, not just picking and choosing the ones she thought were most critical. And here's the part that is truly transformative. She can now put $100 a month into an emergency fund, and another $50 toward a fund to visit her family. She is no longer just surviving, she is planning, she's living. And the impact, it just goes so far beyond the numbers on a spreadsheet. You know, the first thing that changed for Eleanor was emotional. That constant knot she had in her stomach, it started to loosen. She could actually sleep through the night without waking up worrying about bills. And because she was eating better and taking all her medicine, her blood sugar levels actually started to improve. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of control over her own life, over her own health. That's huge. But here's the thing. The story doesn't stop with Eleanor. It's not just about one person's well-being. Because when seniors gain financial security, the positive effects don't just stop at their front door. They actually ripple outwards, and they end up strengthening the entire community.
Just think about it this way. It's pretty simple. When seniors like Eleanor have a bit more disposable income, where do you think they spend it? It goes to the local grocery store, the neighborhood pharmacy, maybe a local diner for a treat. That money circulates directly inside their own community, and that stimulates the local economy. It supports small businesses, it supports local jobs, it is a direct investment in Main Street.
And then there's this massive, often overlooked benefit to the entire healthcare system. I mean, think about it. When a senior can afford healthy food, all of their prescriptions, and those preventative doctor's visits, guess what? They stay healthier. And that means fewer incredibly expensive emergency room visits, fewer hospitalizations, and a delayed need for costly long-term care. This kind of proactive stability saves the healthcare system and, by extension, us, the taxpayers, billions and billions of dollars every single year.
So at the end of the day, what this all shows us is that the journey from financial stress to genuine security, it's not just an economic issue. It's not just about dollars and cents. Fundamentally, it's about human dignity. It's about recognizing that after a lifetime of contributing to society, our seniors deserve to live with peace of mind, with good health, and with a respectable quality of life. And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. We can calculate budgets, we can track economic ripples, we can put numbers on all of this. But the most profound transformation of all is the one that you can't itemize on a spreadsheet. So beyond all the numbers, what is the true value of peace of mind?
Today, we're diving into a really huge idea that's being debated for the future of Social Security. We're talking about a proposal that could completely reshape the monthly checks for millions of people. And believe it or not, it all comes down to just one number: $1,304. Now, that is not some random figure pulled out of a hat. This is the heart of a major proposal for a new monthly minimum benefit for every single person on Social Security. So, what would that actually mean? Who would it help? And the big one, could it even work? Come on, let's break it all down. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the problem, why this idea is even on the table. Then we'll get into the weeds of the 1304 proposal itself. We'll look at two very different ways it could work, tackle that giant funding question, and then wrap up with a reality check on where things really stand today. Okay, so let's jump right in. To really get why a number like $1,304 is such a big deal, we have to first understand the pretty stark reality that a lot of people in Social Security are facing every single day. Yeah, just look at that number, 10.8 million. That's how many people receiving Social Security benefits are living below the poverty line. And get this, that's often after you count any other income they might have. So this right here, this is the core problem that is people scrambling for a really big solution. So this federal poverty line isn't just some abstract idea. It's a hard number. For 2025, it's pegged at $15,650 a year for a single person. And if you pull out your calculator and divide that by 12 months, yep, you get $1,304 a month. That figure is the absolute rock bottom minimum the government says you need for necessities, and it's at the very center of this whole debate. And that leads us right to the proposal itself. I mean, the logic is pretty straightforward, right? If we know millions of people are living below this very specific income level, the idea being floated is simple. Why not just use Social Security to fix it directly? So the heart of the idea is to create a brand new, hard floor for benefits. It's pretty simple. No matter your work history, no matter how much you paid in, your monthly Social Security check would never be less than the poverty line. It would basically be a guarantee. Now, to see just how massive a change this would be, you gotta see what the current minimum looks like. No, that is not a typo. Believe it or not, the current special minimum benefit can be as low as $50 a month. 50. I mean, that barely gets you a full tank of gas, let alone a week's worth of groceries. It provides almost no real security, and that's the basement level we're starting from. So the idea is to go from a minimum of maybe $50 to a minimum of over $1,300. That isn't just a small tweak, that's a seismic shift. For anyone at the lowest end of the benefit scale, this would be absolutely life-altering. But, and you knew there was a but coming, this is where it all gets a little more complicated. Agreeing that $1,304 sounds good is one thing. Figuring out how to actually do it is way harder. And right now, there are two really different visions for how it could be done. Okay, so on one side, you have the minimum benefit approach. Think of it like a safety net. If your current benefit is, say, $900 a month, this plan would boost it up to $1,304. Simple. But if you're already getting $1,800, nothing changes for you. It just helps the lowest earners. Now, on the other side is the much more radical flat benefit idea. This would set everyone's benefit, no matter who you are, to exactly $1,304. So that person at $900 goes up, but the person getting $1,800, their benefit would actually get cut. And that flat benefit approach, wow, that would fundamentally transform the entire system. For its whole history, Social Security has been based on this idea. What you get out is linked to what you paid in. A flat benefit would completely sever that link. It would basically turn Social Security into a guaranteed basic income for more than 70 million Americans, where everybody gets the exact same check. And this is why that flat benefit idea is, well, so controversial. Sure, it would be a huge help to people at the very bottom, but it would mean a massive pay cut for millions of others. Right now, the average retirement benefit is just under $2,000 a month. So under a flat benefit plan, the average retiree would suddenly see their payment drop by nearly $700. Can you imagine telling people who planned their entire retirement around a certain income that it's about to be slashed? Yeah, the political opposition would be enormous, which is why most people see this version as pretty much a non-starter. So let's put that flat benefit idea aside for a second and just focus on the more popular version, just lifting up the lowest earners. Even with that more modest plan, we still slam into the biggest question of all. How in the world do you pay for it? Yeah, this is the multi-trillion-dollar question. Raising benefits for millions of people isn't free. It would cost a staggering amount of money, and right now, nobody really agrees on where that money should come from. It's almost always the hardest part of the puzzle to solve.
Well, one idea that gets thrown around is to look at the Social Security Trust Fund itself. It's got about $2.7 trillion in it, but it's invested super conservatively, so it's only getting back about a 2.4% return. Some people argue that if we invested that money a little more strategically, we could generate billions more in revenue without raising taxes on anybody. But of course, a strategy like that comes with a whole new set of risks and a whole lot of heated debate. So, after all this talk about poverty lines, different visions, and where to find the money, where do things actually stand today? It's really important we do a reality check on whether any of this is actually close to happening. And the honest to goodness reality is that right now, these are all just ideas. There are a ton of proposals floating around Washington, but there isn't one single piece of legislation that has broad support. A lot of observers say the concerning thing isn't just that this specific plan isn't moving forward, but that there's no unified plan for the future of Social Security at all. So, what's the most important thing to take away from all this? Well, even if the $1,304 plan doesn't become law tomorrow, the fact that we're even having this conversation is huge. It tells us that the debate around Social Security is changing. The focus is starting to shift from seeing it as just a retirement program to seeing it as a powerful tool we could use to fight poverty head on and provide a real financial safety net. And that really leaves us with this one fundamental question. For decades, we've thought of Social Security as an earned benefit. You work, you pay in, and you get it back. But should its main purpose evolve? Should its number one job be to make sure no senior, no person with a disability has to live in poverty, no matter what they earned in the past? The answer to that question is going to define the future of Social Security for generations to come.
Let's talk about a number, just $200. It might not sound like a whole lot of money in the grand scheme of things, but we're about to explore how, for millions of people, it's everything. This isn't just a story about finances, it's a journey from the daily stress of just scraping by to having a real sense of security and, just some basic dignity. So let's get right into it. To really get a handle on what an extra $200 means, you have to know the starting point. And here it is, $1,905. That is the average Social Security check that someone gets each month right now. That works out to less than $23,000 a year. Just try to keep that number in your head, because for millions of Americans, that's it. That's the entire pie they have to work with to cover every single bill, every single month.
So how far does that $1,900 actually stretch? Well, let's take a look. It disappears fast. Housing alone eats up a huge chunk. Then you've got utilities, healthcare, prescriptions. That's another $700 right there. Throw in food and a way to get around, and boom, you're at $1,835. Now look at that bottom line. After all of that, everything you absolutely have to pay, you're left with $70. $70 for the rest of the month. For an emergency, for a pair of socks, for a birthday card, for literally anything that isn't a bill.
And that $70 cushion, it's not really a cushion at all. It forces people into these just impossible situations every single day. This quote really hits home because it's the reality behind the spreadsheet. You're literally choosing between two things you need to stay alive: the healthy food your doctor tells you to eat or the medicine your doctor tells you to take. That's the kind of grinding, constant stress we're talking about. A world where one unexpected car repair can throw your entire life into chaos.
Okay, so that's the problem. But what if the solution was actually pretty simple? What if there was a way to just relieve some of that pressure? That's what we're looking at next. It's a proposal in the Social Security Expansion Act, and it's basically a lifeline designed to pull people out of that daily squeeze.
And here it is, the core of the entire idea. A straightforward, no-frills increase of $200 a month for every person receiving Social Security. That's an extra $2,400 a year. It's not some complicated formula or a temporary fix. It's just a flat boost, designed to give immediate, tangible help to catch up with the cost of living that has just soared past what benefits can cover.
But what is $200 really, in the real world? Well, it's not about luxuries, it's about dignity. It could mean paying for 10 doctor's copays without having a panic attack. It could be 3 months of internet, which, let's be honest, is an essential utility now for connecting with family or doctors. It could mean you finally get the new glasses you've needed for years but kept putting off. This just shows you $200 isn't just money, it's the freedom to take care of your own basic needs.
And this right here, this is the math that changes everything. Look at the before and after. The cost of the absolute necessities, that stays the same. But the breathing room, that leftover cash for anything else, it jumps from $70 to $270. That's almost 4 times as much. This is the difference between living on the edge of a cliff and having a little bit of solid ground under your feet. It's the moment you can stop just surviving and maybe,
Just maybe start planning.
The numbers are one thing, but the real story is always about people. So let's shift gears from the budget sheet and zoom in on a human story. We'll use the example of a woman named Eleanor to see how a little bit of money can transform a life from one of constant, grinding anxiety to one of personal agency, where you actually feel like you have some control.
You know, before you even buy anything, the very first thing that changes is this: the emotional weight. This quote says it all, doesn't it? Worrying about money is a physical thing. It ties your stomach in knots. It keeps you up at night. The first thing this extra $200 buys is a little bit of peace, the ability to sleep, the loosening of that constant anxiety. Honestly, that relief from chronic stress is one of the biggest health benefits you could ask for.
So, once that knot in her stomach starts to loosen, Eleanor can actually start making choices. Look at this progression. Step 1, she secures her health. She can buy all her prescriptions, no more cutting pills in half. Step 2, she improves her health by getting the fresh, nutritious food she needs. Step 3, she builds a safety net, a small emergency fund for when the car breaks down. And then finally, step 4, she can start saving for something that brings her joy, like visiting her family. That is what agency looks like.
All right, let's put some real numbers to Eleanor's story. Her income was a little under the average, but with the increase, it goes up to $1,950. So where does the extra money go? She puts an extra $50 toward better groceries. Another $50 goes to making sure she can cover all her prescriptions. And this is huge. She puts $100 away into an emergency fund, something that was just a fantasy before. And even after all those critical investments in her own well-being, she still has $50 left over. This is what a budget with dignity looks like.
Now, Eleanor is just one person. But what happens when you multiply her story by millions? Well, the impact doesn't just stop at her front door. It creates this powerful ripple effect that actually starts to benefit her entire community and even the economy as a whole.
So, what are these ripples? Well, first, it's a direct stimulus for local businesses. Seniors spend their money right where they live, at the corner pharmacy, the local grocery store. That money stays in the community. Second, it can actually lower healthcare costs for everyone. When people can afford their medicine and healthy food, they're way less likely to end up in the emergency room, which is incredibly expensive. And finally, when you're not constantly stressed about survival, you have the bandwidth to be part of your community, to volunteer, to participate, to connect.
So, this all leads to the big, obvious question, right? This sounds great, but where does the money come from? How is this all paid for? Well, the Social Security Expansion Act lays out a plan that's designed to make the whole system solvent for the next 75 years. Let's dig into how that would work.
The funding plan really has two key parts. First, it changes who pays Social Security taxes. Right now, there's a cap on how much of your income is taxed for Social Security. This plan would keep that cap, but it would start applying the tax again on all earnings over $250,000. Essentially, it asks the highest earners to contribute more. The second big change is about the future. It would change how the annual cost of living adjustments are calculated. It would switch to something called the CPIE, which is a measure of inflation designed specifically for seniors. Because seniors spend a much bigger chunk of their income on things like healthcare, which gets more expensive faster, this index is meant to give a much more accurate picture of their real costs, leading to more realistic benefit increases down the road.
So in the end, we're back where we started. We've looked at the numbers, the budgets, the ripple effects, the funding, but beneath all of that, it all boils down to a much simpler, more fundamental question. What is the actual value of dignity? What's the price of a good night's sleep, of not having to choose between food and medicine? That's the real conversation here.
If you've been keeping an eye on the news about benefits, your head is probably spinning, right? You're hearing about a $2,400 boost over here, and then $1,200 monthly checks over there. It's a total whirlwind, and honestly, it's super confusing. So, what we're going to do right now is slice through all that noise. We're going to break down exactly what these plans are, who they're actually for, and what it all could mean for your wallet.
So yeah, let's really get into this, because this is the big one, isn't it? Are these numbers part of the same plan? Or are we talking about two totally separate things? And you know, the question I bet you're really asking is, hey, could I get both? It's so easy to see how these things get tangled up in the headlines, but trust me, they are two very, very different ideas. Our goal here is simple. We're going to give you the clarity you've been looking for. You'll know exactly what each plan is and what it's not.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll talk about this flood of proposals out there. Then we'll dig into Plan 1, that's the $2,400 boost. After that, Plan 2, the $1,200 monthly checks. Then, the one you're waiting for, can you get both? And we'll wrap up by looking at the bigger picture, why all this is happening right now.
All right, Section 1.
a flood of proposals. Let's try to make some sense of all the different plans being discussed. I mean, it really feels like every single week there's a new idea or a new bill being talked about, right? So let's just categorize them a bit to figure out what's what.
You know, it's so easy to get lost in all the headlines. And you might have even seen some of these ideas pop up in your local news. There are all kinds of city and state-level programs being tested out. But for today, to keep things simple and focused, we are zeroing in on the two big ones, the major national proposals. Because, let's face it, those are the ones that would affect everybody.
Okay, before we get any deeper, we've got to clear something up. There's some key jargon here, GBI and UBI. Guaranteed basic income versus universal basic income. They sound similar, but they are not the same thing. Think of it like this. UBI, the U stands for universal, means everybody gets it. Rich, poor, everyone, no questions asked. GBI, on the other hand, that G is for guaranteed, but only for a specific group of people, usually based on their income. The big national plans we're talking about today, they're GBI. All right, on to Section 2. Let's talk about Plan 1, the $2,400 boost. This is all about the Social Security Expansion Act. And the first thing to know is, this isn't some brand new payment program. Nope. This is all about boosting an existing one. We're talking about a direct increase to Social Security benefits. So, the magic number everyone's talking about is this, an extra $2,400 a year. Now, what does that really mean? It means an extra $200 every single month. And look, for anyone on a fixed income, you know that $200 isn't just pocket change. That's a huge deal. That could cover groceries for the week, a utility bill, or those annoying copays. It's a real, tangible difference, and it's the heart of this proposal.
So how would this thing actually work? Well, the official name is the Social Security Expansion Act. You've probably heard lawmakers like Senator Bernie Sanders talking about it, and here's who it's for. As the bill's written right now, it's for all Social Security beneficiaries. That means retirement, disability, survivors, the whole shebang. And the other critical piece of the puzzle is the funding. Where does the money come from? It would come from the Social Security system itself, funded by payroll taxes through the Social Security Trust Fund.
Okay, now let's switch gears completely for Section 3. We're looking at Plan 2, those $1,200 monthly checks. And this is a whole different ballgame. We're no longer talking about tweaking an existing program. This is about creating something brand new from the ground up, a national guaranteed basic income.
And the numbers here are even bigger. We're talking $1,200 every single month for each eligible adult, plus another $600 for each dependent. I mean, let's do the math. That's over $14,000 a year for one person. For a couple, you're looking at almost $29,000 before you even add in dependents. A key piece of legislation here is called the Support Act, and the whole idea is to create a recurring payment like a national income floor for people.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty. How would this GBI plan work? Well, a major difference right off the bat, eligibility has nothing to do with being in a specific program like Social Security. Nope, it's all about your income. The Support Act, for instance, sets the cutoff at around $75,000 for an individual. The funding is also totally separate. This money isn't coming from the Social Security Trust Fund, it would come from general federal funds. Think of it like the stimulus checks we saw a few years back. Same kind of idea.
Okay, let's put these two plans side by side. This is where the light bulb really goes on. You've got the Social Security boost, that's an increase to a benefit you already have, for Social Security beneficiaries only, and paid for by the Social Security Fund. Then you've got the National GBI, that's a brand new program for people based on their income and paid for with general federal money. See? They're like two different trains running on two separate tracks. Getting this difference is absolutely crucial for what comes next.
Which, of course, brings us to Section 4, and the question that I know is on your mind. Could you get both payments? If both of these proposals actually became law, could one person get money from both? Let's find out.
So let's really spell it out. Could a fixed income beneficiary get payments from both of these proposals at the same time? Imagine you're on Social Security. The first plan passes, boom, you get an extra $200 a month. Then the second plan passes, and your income qualifies you. Could you also get that $1,200 check on top of it? That's the million-dollar question, right?
And the answer is yes. Simple as that. Based on how these proposals are written right now, you absolutely could. I know, it might sound a little too good to be true, but when you see how they're designed, the logic is actually rock solid.
So why isn't this double dipping? It really boils down to two super simple reasons. First, they are separate programs. They just are. One is a tweak to your Social Security, and the other is a totally new income program. They don't overlap. And second, and this is huge, they have separate funding. Remember, one is paid from the Social Security Trust Fund, the other from general federal funds. It's like getting your paycheck from your job and also winning a lottery prize.
two different pots of money.
So that leads us to our last section, the future of benefits. You have to wonder, right? Why are these huge conversations happening right now? The answer is pretty interesting. It's because a lot of folks in Washington aren't just looking at today, they're looking down the road, 5, 10 years from now.
See, the argument is that lawmakers are looking ahead, and they believe a national income floor is needed before it's too late. The idea is that our economy is about to go through a massive, massive change because of technology. And the people pushing for these plans are saying, look, we need to build this safety net now, before things get crazy. It's about being proactive instead of just reacting to a crisis after it's already here.
And you can hear that urgency when they talk about what's coming. They say things like, we're going to be completely overrun by AI, sophisticated technology, robotics, automation. And that's really the heart of it. The fear is that all this new tech is going to eliminate a ton of jobs, and soon. The thinking is that this isn't science fiction anymore. This is a real economic shift that's just around the corner, and something like a GBI might be the only thing that provides some stability.
And really, that leaves us with the biggest question of all. As technology reshapes the entire workforce, how must our economic safety nets evolve? Because at the end of the day, this whole debate isn't just about a specific dollar amount. It's not just about $2,400 or $1,200. The real conversation is about what our safety nets are even for. As technology changes the very definition of a job, how do we make sure everyone has some level of economic security? That's the question that's really pushing all of this forward.
All right, today we're breaking down two huge proposals that could seriously change Social Security and SSI benefits for millions. We're going to look at the Social Security Expansion Act and the SSI Restoration Act to see what they could actually mean for your monthly budget. So let's just dive right into the numbers.
$70. Just let that number sink in for a second. According to the source material, this is what the average person on Social Security has left over each month after paying for the absolute basics. We're not talking about hobbies or going out to eat. We're talking about everything else: a new pair of shoes, cleaning supplies, any kind of unexpected expense. It's a number that really frames this whole conversation. And when you see it laid out like this, wow, it's pretty striking. If you take an average monthly benefit of around $1,900, the source shows that essentials like housing, food, and healthcare just eat up almost all of it. And that tiny, tiny sliver left? Yeah, that's your $70. It just shows you a budget that is stretched to its absolute breaking point.
So to really get why these new proposals are on the table, we first have to understand the full picture of the current financial reality for folks who rely on these programs. This right here is a crucial point, especially for the nearly 8 million Americans on Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. Right now, the max federal benefit is $943 a month, but the federal poverty line is over $100 higher. So right out of the gate, the very program designed to be a safety net leaves people about 12% below the poverty line. And, the reliance on these benefits is just immense. For a huge number of seniors, Social Security isn't some little supplement. It's their main lifeline. For about 1 in 7, it's almost their entire income. This context is absolutely key to understanding why any change, big or small, can have such a massive, massive impact. Okay, so that's the tough reality. So what's being proposed to fix this financial squeeze? Let's get into the details of the two big acts on the table, starting with the one that would affect every single person on Social Security. The Social Security Expansion Act offers a really simple, direct, and honestly powerful change: a $200 a month increase for every single Social Security recipient, period, across the board. It's not some complex percentage or confusing formula, it's a flat increase. Annually, that comes out to an extra $2,400. For a lot of households, that's a figure that could totally change their budget. Now for people on SSI. The proposed Restoration Act is even more detailed. First, it would bump benefits up to 100% of the federal poverty level, finally closing that gap we just talked about. Second, and this part is huge, it would modernize the asset limits. Right now, an individual can't have more than $2,000 in assets. That limit, get this, has been frozen since 1989. This act raises it to $10,000 for individuals and $20,000 for couples, which means people could actually have a small emergency fund without being penalized. And finally, it would let people keep more of the money they earn from part-time work. Okay, numbers on a slide are one thing, but what does this all mean in the real world? Let's walk through a few detailed examples from the source material to get a much clearer picture. So let's meet Margaret. She's 72, and her only income is $1,650 a month from Social Security. You can see her budget right here. After rent, utilities, food, Medicare, and prescriptions, she has just $120 left.
The source explains she's stuck making impossible choices. Does she buy the fresh vegetables that help her manage her diabetes, or does she pay for her blood pressure medication? I mean, that's the reality behind these numbers. Now, let's apply that proposed $200 increase. Her income goes up to $1,850. And just look at the difference in her new budget. She can now afford more for groceries to get that fresh produce, and, crucially, she can start putting $100 a month into an emergency fund. She doesn't have to choose between food and medicine anymore. That's not just a budget change, that's a life change. And that really gets to a central theme here. These proposals are about giving people security and dignity. It's about being able to handle a flat tire without it turning into a full-blown financial crisis. Let's see how this same idea applies to someone on SSI. Okay, now meet Robert. He's 68, he's disabled, and he lives on the maximum SSI benefit of $943. After his subsidized rent, utilities, food, and medical costs, he's left with just $23 for the entire month. The source material notes he hasn't been able to afford a new pair of glasses in 3 years. His budget just shows a life lived perpetually on the edge. Under the SSI Restoration Act, Robert's benefit would jump up to over $1,000 a month. Now, that increase of about $130 might seem modest, but look at the difference it makes. He can increase his grocery budget, start a small $50 emergency fund, and afford $30 for essentials like new shoes. Sure, it's still a tight budget, but he's no longer choosing between basic necessities every single day. And importantly, he's now above the poverty line. The source material also shows us how these acts could actually work together for a family. So let's take a look at the Johnsons, a married couple in their late 60s. Here's the Johnsons' budget right now. Their combined Social Security is $3,200 a month. As you can see, their expenses eat up almost all of it, leaving them with just $130 and forcing them to make some really tough choices about their health care. Okay, now let's apply the proposed changes. The Social Security Expansion Act would give each of them $200 more a month, so that's $400 total. The source also points out that other factors, like separate tax law changes, could add even more relief, creating a combined potential income boost of $550 a month. And here's the potential result. With that extra income, their whole budget shifts. They could afford healthier food, fully cover their prescriptions, and, this is a big one, create dedicated funds for emergencies and for dental care. They'd go from having $130 in wiggle room to having a stable budget with savings. This really shows you the tangible kitchen table impact that's being proposed here. Of course, anytime you talk about increasing benefits, the big question always comes up, right? How would we pay for it? Well, the legislation laid out in the source material provides a very specific funding plan. So, here's the crucial point. Right now, the Social Security payroll tax only applies to your income up to a certain limit, a little over $160,000. Any money you earn above that cap isn't subject to the tax. This proposal would reapply that tax on all income over $250,000, basically asking the highest earners to contribute more. This chart really spells it out. The way the system works now, a person earning $1 million a year pays the exact same dollar amount into Social Security as someone earning $160,000. Why? Because all that income above the cap isn't taxed for Social Security. This proposal is designed to close that gap. And there's one other key financial piece to this. The plan also proposes changing the formula for the annual cost of living adjustment, or COLA. It would switch to something called the CPIE, the Consumer Price Index for the Elderly. Now, this metric is specifically designed to better reflect what seniors actually spend their money on, things like healthcare and housing, which often see their costs rise way faster than general inflation. The goal is pretty simple: make future COLAs more realistic. So, when you pull back from all the spreadsheets and the budgets, what's the central argument being made here? Ultimately, the argument in the source material is that these proposals are about more than just money. They're presented as a statement of our values, the idea that a lifetime of contributing to society should be rewarded with a retirement that's free from constant financial anxiety and the stress of choosing between basic human needs. And so we end with this thought. The whole debate around these numbers, these funding plans, and these policies, it really all comes back to this one fundamental question. The proposals we've looked at today are one answer to it, an attempt to redefine what security in retirement should really look like.
There's all this talk about monthly raises and new checks, so we're going to break down what's really being discussed.
You've probably seen these two big numbers floating around everywhere. But honestly, there is a lot of confusion. Are they real? Are they connected? Is it one or the other?
Let's clear the air and figure out exactly what these are and, more importantly, where they actually stand.
Okay, so our goal here is to cut through the noise and separate what's just speculation from the actual reality. We're going to look at each of these ideas one by one, where it came from, what its purpose is, and of course, what's its current status.
First up, let's talk about that proposal for a permanent monthly increase to Social Security benefits. And I want to stress that this isn't a one-time payment, but a recurring, every single month addition to your check.
The magic number being tossed around here is $200. The idea is for this to be an ongoing adjustment to help folks deal with rising costs, and it would be totally separate from the usual cost of living adjustments, or COLAs, that we already have.
Now, this isn't just some idea pulled out of thin air. It's actually a key part of a real piece of legislation that has been introduced in Congress. It's called the Social Security Expansion Act.
But, and this is a really big but, here's the reality check. While the bill is out there, it has not been passed by Congress. It hasn't been signed into law. It is still very, very much just a proposal with a long road ahead before it could ever become a reality.
So why hasn't it passed? Well, it seems there's a pretty big hurdle holding this whole thing back. Even though the idea of more money sounds great to a lot of people, the way the proposal is structured right now is creating a bit of a political challenge. Let's take a look at what that is.
And here's the crux of the problem: targeting. See, the bill as it's written now gives this raise to pretty much everybody. And the critics are saying, hang on, do higher income recipients really need this extra cash? The suggestion floating around is to refine it, to focus that raise specifically on lower income beneficiaries, to make it a tool to lift people above the federal poverty line. That, they argue, would be a much more compelling pitch, and maybe an easier sell to lawmakers.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about the other big number you've probably heard about. And it's important to know this is a totally different beast. We are not talking about a permanent benefit increase here. This is an economic intervention.
Yep. This one is all about a one-time payment of $2,000. So think of it less like a raise and more like a single shot of cash, a one-and-done deal. And that is a really key distinction to make. See, a stimulus check has basically nothing to do with the Social Security system itself. It's a broad economic tool the government pulls out of its toolbox when the whole economy is in trouble, think recession or high unemployment, to try and get people to start spending again. So just like that $200 raise, let's be super clear on this one too. No new stimulus check has been approved. Right now, it is completely hypothetical. It's an idea that would only even get on the table if the economy really started to take a significant downturn.
So let's just imagine for a second that a stimulus check did get approved. Who would get it? Well, we can look at past stimulus rounds for some pretty good clues. The biggest hurdle, as always, would likely be income. Your income would need to be below a certain threshold to qualify, on top of other requirements like having a Social Security number and not being claimed as a dependent on someone else's taxes.
Okay, this next part is where things seem to get really confusing for a lot of people. It's the big question. Are we talking about one or the other? If, by some wild turn of events, both of these things were to pass, would you have to choose between them? Let's clear this up right now.
In other words, are these two ideas mutually exclusive? Let's say the stars align, the Social Security Expansion Act passes, and the economy gets bad enough for a stimulus. Could a person theoretically get both the permanent raise and the one-time check? Let's break down just how different they really are.
I mean, just look at this breakdown. They are fundamentally different concepts. The raise is a permanent change to your Social Security benefits. The trigger for it is a new law passing. The stimulus check, that's a one-time payment to jolt the economy. And the trigger for that is bad economic data. And look at where the money comes from. One is from the Social Security program, the other from general Treasury funds. Two totally separate buckets of money.
So the simple answer is yes. You could, in theory, receive both. They're totally separate proposals that don't conflict with each other at all. They have different goals, different triggers, and they come from different pots of money. Getting one wouldn't automatically disqualify you from the other as long as you met the specific eligibility rules for each one.
Okay, so we've broken down both of these big ideas that are getting so much attention. So what's the bottom line? What's the reality on the ground as of today?
And folks, if you take away only one single thing from this entire explainer, please let it be this. As of right now, neither the $200 raise nor a new stimulus check has been approved. Despite all the headlines, all the videos, all the discussion, both of these ideas are still just that. Ideas and proposals. They are not a reality.
So if you want to keep an eye on these things yourself, here's what to watch for. For that $200 raise, you need to track the progress of the Social Security Expansion Act in Congress. Is it moving through committees? Is it being debated? For a potential stimulus check, you'll need to watch the major economic reports, things like inflation, unemployment, and GDP. That's the kind of data that would even start that conversation in the first place.
And you know, all of this leaves us with one final, maybe bigger thought to chew on. The fact that we're even having these conversations so often, the fact that these ideas get so much attention online, what does that tell us? It suggests there's a real deep-seated issue with financial security and the struggle that so many people face with rising costs. And that's a conversation worth paying attention to, regardless of what happens with these specific proposals.
We're going to dive into the story behind just one number. And look, it's an amount that for some of us might not seem like a whole lot. But for millions of our seniors and people with disabilities, it is the absolute dividing line between waking up every day with crushing financial stress and living a life with security and dignity. So let's find out exactly what that number is.
$200. That's it. Before we go any further, just take a second. What does $200 mean in your world? Is it a nice dinner out for two, maybe a couple of concert tickets, a new pair of headphones? For a lot of people, yeah, it's a nice to have. But what we're about to see is how for a huge part of our community, this exact same amount of money isn't a bonus, it is a lifeline.
All right, so where does this all start? Well, it begins with this really fundamental problem. There's this gap, and it's getting wider and wider between the fixed incomes that are supposed to support our seniors and people with disabilities and the real-world, ever-rising cost of just staying alive. And let's be really, really clear about this from the get-go. What we're talking about here is not some kind of personal failure. This has nothing to do with people being bad at budgeting. No, this is a systemic issue. The very safety net that we created to give people security is being stretched so thin it's at its breaking point. It just can't keep up with the economic reality people are actually facing.
And you can see that gap right here in the numbers. So Social Security benefits get a little bump each year for inflation. It's called the cost of living adjustment, or COLA. For 2025, that increase was just 2.5%. But look at what happened to the cost of everything else. Housing, up almost 6%. Healthcare, up 6.5%. And utilities, up over 7%. So the takeaway is devastatingly simple. Even though their checks got a tiny bit bigger, people actually ended up with less money in their pockets because their buying power just got swallowed whole.
So, that's the big picture data. But let's move away from the charts for a minute and see what this financial squeeze actually looks like in real, everyday life. This is where those numbers stop being statistics and become the tough, daily reality for millions of people.
I want you to meet Maria. She's 78 years old, and she lives by herself. And her words, they just cut right to the heart of this whole thing, don't they? She's not asking for a vacation or some luxury item. She's just trying to keep her head above water. But that tide of rising costs is just relentless. So let's break down exactly how she ended up here.
You know, for Maria, it wasn't one big disaster that did it. It was, as they say, death by 1,000 cuts. It was her rent going up $75, her utilities jumping $40, her groceries costing another $30. You add it all up, and her basic expenses shot up by over $200 in 1 year. And the benefit increase she got to cover all that? Just $39. $39. That left her in a $162 hole every single month. I mean, how is anyone supposed to climb out of that?
So what does being $162 short actually look like day to day? Well, it looks like making impossible choices. It means Maria isn't buying fresh fruit or vegetables anymore because they're too expensive. It means she's literally cutting her cholesterol pills in half so the prescription will last twice as long. It means keeping her thermostat at a frigid 60 degrees all winter long. And she is absolutely not alone. We hear stories like George's. He has this painful arthritis and needs an injection every month, but he can't afford it, so he stretches it to every 6 weeks, choosing to live in agony. You see, these aren't really choices at all, are they? They're just acts of pure desperation.
Okay, so that's the problem. And I know, it's pretty heavy, but there is hope. After looking at just how deep this crisis goes, let's pivot. Let's look at the solution. Let's really explore the unbelievable, life-changing power of what might seem like a pretty small amount of money, just an extra $200 a month.
So what can that $200 actually buy? This isn't abstract. It's 10 copays to see a doctor. It's paying your cell phone bill for 2 months, which we all know is a critical link to family, to doctors, to 911. It's the difference between being able to afford all your medications or having to choose which illness you're going to treat this month. We're not talking about luxuries here.
These are the absolute basic building blocks of a stable, healthy life.
Now, to really get the impact, let's meet Eleanor. She's 74, and her story is just a perfect example of this transformation. She gets $1,750 a month from Social Security. Now, before any kind of increase, once she paid for rent, utilities, food, and her medicine, she had exactly $100 left over. $100 for absolutely everything else for the entire month. A car repair, a new pair of shoes, a birthday gift for her grandkid. It was a life lived constantly on a knife's edge.
So yeah, the before picture is a life just stretched to the breaking point, with that tiny $100 buffer for any kind of emergency. But the after picture, it's a total game changer. With that extra $200, of course she could afford better food and all of her prescriptions. But look what else shows up in her budget. An emergency fund, and a fund for family visits. She went from just barely surviving to actually living. She finally had a buffer, she found stability.
And, beyond all the practical numbers, the very first and biggest change for Eleanor was emotional. She talked about how she used to wake up every single morning with this tight knot in her stomach, just this constant hum of anxiety about money. And that stress, it led to skipping meals, to not being able to sleep at night. But with that extra $200, that feeling was just gone. It was replaced by this profound sense of relief. She started sleeping through the night again, her actual health got better simply because that chronic grinding stress was lifted. For the first time in years, she felt like she was in control of her own life.
And Eleanor's story isn't just a one-off. The amazing impact of this kind of financial stability, it doesn't stop with one person. It actually ripples outward, making the entire community and even our healthcare system stronger.
Think about it. When seniors have a little extra money, where do you think it goes? It doesn't get socked away in some offshore account. It goes right back into the local economy. They spend it at the corner grocery store, the local pharmacy, the neighborhood diner. That spending supports local businesses and helps create jobs. And beyond that, when people aren't stuck in survival mode 24/7, they have the bandwidth to give back, to volunteer, to participate, to connect with their neighbors. The whole social fabric just gets stronger.
And then there's the massive benefit to our healthcare system. I mean, it's just common sense, right? Prevention is always cheaper than a crisis. When people like Eleanor and Maria can afford healthy food, take all their prescribed medications, and go for regular checkups, they are so much less likely to have a major health event that lands them in the emergency room for an expensive hospital stay. We're talking about a change that saves the healthcare system billions of dollars every single year.
So, let's just recap the journey we've been on. We started with the hard data, that widening gap between income and costs. Then we saw the personal stories, those impossible choices people are forced to make. And finally, we saw the incredible power of a solution. We've seen the clear path from stress to security.
Because in the end, this is about so much more than dollars and cents. It's really about what we value as a society. It's about deciding that after a lifetime of contributing, people deserve to live with some basic security and peace of mind. And this transformation from stress to security, it's not a fantasy. It's completely possible. The moment we decide to truly prioritize the health, the dignity, and the well-being of everyone in our community.
The numbers we've gone through today are crystal clear. The stories are incredibly powerful, but they all lead us here to this one last question. And it's something that you can't really put on a spreadsheet. What is the true value of dignity?
You ever wonder what it would actually take for another stimulus check to be sent out? Well, the answer might surprise you. It's not really about politics. It's all about economic data. So today, let's break down the dominoes that have to fall for that to happen. All right, let's just dive right into the biggest question of all. It seems kind of backward, right? But the answer is, yeah. A weaker economy has always been the single biggest trigger for widespread government stimulus. Let's get into why that is. Okay, first things first. We have to understand why this topic even keeps coming up. I mean, it's not just people being curious. For millions, this question is a direct reflection of their own wallets right now. And this quote, this really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? This is the kind of thing you see in comment sections everywhere. When people are really struggling just to cover the basics, that whole conversation about financial relief, well, it gets really loud and it gets really constant. This is probably the most crucial thing to get. Yeah, stimulus checks are passed by politicians, but they're not really a political tool. A better way to think of them is like an economic emergency brake. You only pull that lever when the whole system is slowing down fast and needs a serious jolt to get going again. So that brings us to the trigger itself. What does a weak economy actually look like on paper, in terms of the data? And how do those numbers signal to lawmakers that, hey, maybe it's time to step in?
this chart lays it out perfectly. It's like two sides of the same coin. On the left, you've got all the signs of a healthy, humming economy. But on the right, those are the alarm bells. When economists see a big nationwide shift from the left column to the right column, especially that jump in unemployment and a drop in spending, that's the signal. That's when you know the economy is in trouble, and the talk about intervention really starts. You know, this whole cycle of the economy tanking and then lawmakers scrambling to do something, it led a few of them to float a pretty radical idea. What if the help just happened automatically? The idea was called automatic stabilizers. And you can just think of it like a simple if-then command for the economy. If unemployment hits a certain number, then relief payments are automatically sent out. The whole goal was to get money into people's hands way faster by cutting out the slow, messy legislative part. Now, the downside is less oversight, but the focus was on speed. Now, this proposed system gives us a really clear window into how policymakers think about this stuff. And even though this plan never became law, the logic here is absolutely key. It ties stimulus directly to one specific number, the unemployment rate. The plan was super simple. If unemployment hits, say 6%, boom, a payment goes out. If it gets even worse, boom, another one follows. It just shows you how central that single data point is to the whole discussion. Okay, so let's shift gears and look at how this plays out in the real world right now. How does a slowing economy actually turn into money in your bank account? This is the typical chain reaction. And man, it usually happens fast. It all starts with that rapid economic contraction. And in response, lawmakers don't just act, they act big. They scramble to pass these enormous spending bills. Once a bill gets passed, a small slice of that massive pie is carved out and sent directly to us, the consumers. And it's all for one reason: to get people spending again and restart that economic engine. And it's so important to remember this. The checks themselves are almost never a standalone thing. They're usually just one piece of these gigantic, multi-billion, sometimes trillion-dollar packages with these big, sweeping names. The direct payments, they're kind of like the little bone thrown to regular folks inside these much, much larger spending bills.
I love this old stock market saying because it perfectly captures why lawmakers have to move so fast. You know, an economy usually grows pretty slowly, methodically, like walking up a flight of stairs. But when it falls fast, like an elevator with the cables cut. It's that sudden, sharp drop that creates the urgency, the political pressure to pass something, anything, quickly.
So, here's another way to look at it, and it's a bit more controversial. Some economists actually see recessions as a totally normal, maybe even necessary, part of the business cycle. They call it a big old reset, a chance to clear out the old, inefficient stuff and make way for new growth. From this point of view, stimulus checks aren't really about stopping the reset, but more about cushioning the fall for everybody during that painful, but maybe inevitable transition. Okay, so we've got all these moving parts, all this data, GDP, inflation, consumer sentiment. So if you want to know what the real chances are of another stimulus, it really just comes down to one number. There is one indicator that stands head and shoulders above the rest in predicting what the government will do next. It gives us the clearest, most immediate picture of what's happening to the economy's health right now. And that number is, you guessed it, the unemployment rate. This is the 30,000-foot view. It tells you, in really broad strokes, whether the country is growing or shrinking. So why does this one number matter so much? Well, because a rising unemployment rate kicks off a really nasty, vicious cycle. Businesses start cutting jobs because their revenue is shrinking. But that means people have less money to spend, which, you guessed it, shrinks business revenue even more. It's a downward spiral, and lawmakers try to use stimulus to break that cycle. That's why a consistently rising unemployment rate is, without a doubt, the most important catalyst to watch. And all of this leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought. If a weak economy is what triggers financial help, does that mean we actually have to go through a painful economic reset for widespread relief to even become possible? It's a really complicated question about the tangled relationship between collective hardship and government help. What if your financial future was about to get a major, and I mean major boost? Well, today we're going to break down some really key proposals that could mean more security, more dignity, and just more peace of mind for millions of people. And it all starts with one number that could change everything. Let's just put this number right out there, $2,400. Now, this isn't just some random figure we pulled out of thin air. It represents the potential extra income you could see in a single year from one of the key proposals we're going to talk about today. So just take a second and really think about that. What would that mean for your budget, for your family, for your own well-being? That's really the big question we're unpacking today. How these numbers on a screen could translate into real, tangible improvements in your life. Okay, so where could all this extra money actually come from? Well, the first big proposal on the table is basically a direct raise for your retirement. And the details, honestly, are pretty exciting.
The Social Security Expansion Act is proposing a really straightforward, across-the-board increase of $200. And that's not a one-time thing. That's $200 times every single month for all Social Security recipients. You do the math. That's the $2,400 a year we just saw. And you can really see the transformation on this chart. It shows the shift from a budget that's, super tight with maybe a tiny bit left over to one with some real breathing room. That jump right there, that represents the powerful change from just barely getting by to feeling genuinely more secure. Here's how the math breaks down for an average person. Right now, after all the essential bills are paid, you might have about $70 left. But with this increase, that leftover amount could jump all the way to $270. That's nearly 4 times the spending money each month, which gives you real choice and flexibility. So, where are these big ideas coming from? Let's take a quick look at the actual legislative blueprint that's aiming to strengthen financial security for millions. There are really 2 key proposals leading the charge here. First, as we mentioned, is the Social Security Expansion Act. That's the one with the potential $200 monthly raise. And the second one is the SSI Restoration Act, which focuses specifically on improving benefits and, restoring some dignity for folks who receive supplemental security income. Now, for SSI recipients, this act proposes a monthly increase of $130. And the goal here is really specific. It's to raise the benefit up to 100% of the federal poverty level, which would be a much-needed lift. And it's not just about the monthly check. The act also wants to raise the amount of money you can have in savings without losing your benefits, all the way up to $10,000 for individuals. I mean, this is a huge deal for being able to build a small emergency fund and finally gain a little bit of security. But let's be real. How do these numbers on a page actually translate to necessities in your home? Let's get into the real-world impact, because that's where these proposals truly come to life. This quote, which is inspired by so many real stories, it just gets right to the heart of it. It's about transforming daily life, right? Moving away from that constant financial anxiety and toward the dignity of just being able to afford essentials like medicine and healthy food. This chart here gives us a great picture of what that new financial freedom could actually look like. It means being able to use your money not just to survive, but to actually thrive, to cover fresh groceries, get vital medications, and maybe even have enough to put into savings or go visit loved ones. And to put it in even more concrete terms, just think about what an extra $200 can actually buy. We're talking about tangible, everyday things that make a massive difference in your quality of life. It's not some abstract number. It's security you can actually hold. So, beyond direct benefit increases, there's another really powerful proposal out there to improve financial security. And this one is all about letting you keep more of the money you already have through tax relief. A proposal called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act introduces a new additional tax deduction, $6,000 for individuals over 65 and $12,000 for couples. Now, this would be on top of the deductions that already exist, and it directly lowers your taxable income. Plain and simple, it means you keep more of your own money. So what does that actually mean for your wallet? Well, for a senior with a $30,000 annual income, these changes could translate into an estimated $1,250 in annual tax savings. That's over $100 back in your budget every single month. And the scale of this potential impact is just massive. If this passes, an estimated 88% of all Social Security recipients could owe 0 federal tax on their benefits. Let that sink in. 0. That is a true game changer. So, when we put all of these pieces together, the proposed benefit increases and the potential tax relief, we start to see a really clear path forward. It's a path toward a future with greater financial dignity and real security for everyone. And if you're sitting there wondering, okay, but can these proposals actually become reality? Just consider this. The Social Security Fairness Act recently became law.
This isn't a proposal anymore. It's a concrete victory that has already ended unfair benefit reductions for 3.2 million public servants. And the impact is real, and it's immediate. Thanks to this new law, the people affected are seeing their monthly benefits go up by an average of $360 to $450. This just proves that positive, meaningful change absolutely can and does happen. So let's just quickly recap the path to security that we've explored today. It all starts with proposals for direct, significant benefit increases. Those increases then translate into a real-world impact on necessities. Then, that security could be strengthened even more by tax relief. And all of these steps are leading toward one clear goal: a more secure and dignified future for you. And that really brings us to our final thought. With these potential improvements on the horizon, the question becomes a personal one. What would that future look like for you? How would having greater financial security actually change your life? What would it actually take to get another stimulus check? It's a question that's on pretty much everyone's mind. But the answer, and this might surprise you, it has nothing to do with petitions or our personal bank accounts. So in this explainer, we're going to cut right through all that noise and show you the real economic signals, the actual triggers that government officials are watching. So what is the trigger? We keep hearing the economy is strong, but for a lot of us, that just doesn't line up with what we see in our daily lives. So it's totally natural to wonder if more help is on the way. But the answer isn't hiding in our personal finances. Nope. The real trigger is found in the bigger economic picture.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we're going to talk about the real trigger. Then, we'll get into how to decode the jobs report and those signals from the Fed. After that, we'll look at the history because there's a clear pattern. And finally, we'll get to the bottom line. Okay, first up, the real trigger. To really get what makes a stimulus check happen, we have to make this really crucial shift in how we look at it. It means we got to stop thinking about our own money for a second and start thinking about the health of the entire U.S. economy. Now, this might sound a little harsh, but stimulus checks are not a response to public demand or because individuals are struggling. They aren't triggered just because we ask for them. The reality is, policymakers, they're not looking at individual bank accounts. They're looking at the entire economic landscape. This slide right here lays out the government's priorities perfectly. On the left, you've got the things that feel so important to us, our bank balances, our bills, right? Well, to them, that's essentially noise. What actually gets them to act are the big picture things on the right, the overall health of the U.S. economy, clear signs of it shrinking, and the risk of a full-blown recession. And this quote from our source material really says it all. The entire stimulus machine is built around one thing: the economy. The checks get approved when the economy starts to break down or enters a recession. It's not so much a lifeline for us as it is a tool for them to manage the economy. So if it's all about the economy, how do they measure its health? Well, the single most important barometer they have is the monthly jobs report. Let's decode what it tells us, because honestly, it gives the clearest picture of what's really going on out there. Every first Friday of the month, this report is released, and trust me, it is a huge deal. It tells us how many people are working, how many are unemployed, if wages are going up or down, everything. It's considered one of the biggest factors because, well, a country's workforce is the engine of its economy, plain and simple. And this is where we see the real-world impact behind those percentages. When the unemployment rate goes up by just 1%. That sounds small, right? But that single percentage point represents roughly 1.8 million people losing their jobs. A tiny little tick upwards, say 0.1%, means 180,000 people are suddenly out of work. The scale is just massive. And this is exactly why a rising unemployment rate is so dangerous. It kicks off this vicious cycle. It starts slowly. A few people lose their jobs, so they stop spending money. Then the businesses they used to go to see their sales drop. And to survive, those businesses have to cut costs, which usually means, you guessed it, laying off more people. The whole thing starts to snowball, gaining momentum, and it can drag the entire economy down with it. That is the exact scenario that puts stimulus on the table. Okay, next up, we have signals from the Fed. Beyond the jobs report, the Federal Reserve sends these little hidden signals about the economy's health. And the biggest clue? Their decisions on interest rates. Which brings us to a key question. We constantly hear that the economy is strong. But if that's actually true, why would the Fed ever cut interest rates? Think about it. High rates are used to cool down a strong economy. So when they start talking about cutting them, what are they really telling us? So here's the hidden signal. When the Fed starts cutting interest rates, especially if they do it aggressively, It's a direct admission that the economy is weaker than the official story suggests. They're trying to get ahead of a problem. By making it cheaper to borrow money, they're hoping to get people and businesses to spend more and prop things up. It's their flare gun in the sky saying, hey, trouble's brewing.
Now, this isn't just some theory. This whole response mechanism, a weak economy leading to government action, it's not new. In fact, if we look back over the last, say, quarter century, we can see a very clear and predictable pattern starting to emerge.
The historical pattern is it's undeniable. In every major recession over the last 25 years, the government's response has included stimulus checks. In 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, in 2008 during the Great Financial Crisis, and of course, most recently in 2020. Each time the economy took a nosedive, they responded with direct payments. So the takeaway here is that there's a playbook. When the economy contracts in a bad way, the government reaches for the same tool. So anyone who argues they'll never do it again, well, they're ignoring some very clear history. So let's get to the bottom line. We know that stimulus is triggered by a weak economy, not by what's in our bank accounts. But what's the logic here? Why are direct checks the go-to solution? This is the core of it, right here. We, the citizens, are the delivery mechanism. When the economy is spiraling downwards fast, the government needs to pump cash into it immediately to stop the bleeding. And what is the absolute fastest way to do that? Give it directly to millions of people who will then go out and spend it. It's not really a gift to us, it's using us as a tool to get money moving again. And don't think for a second that this would be a slow process. I mean, the government can be notoriously slow, but not with this. They can move with incredible speed. You remember late December 2020? A stimulus bill was signed on a Monday, and direct deposits started hitting bank accounts on Tuesday, the very next day. So, the ultimate takeaway is this. You no longer have to just passively wait for some announcement on the news. Now you know the signs to watch for yourself. A rising unemployment rate and a Federal Reserve that's starting to cut interest rates. When you see those signals, you'll know the economic conditions are aligning for that stimulus playbook to be used once again. Now, you can be the one who sees it coming.
You know, for so many people trying to make ends meet on a fixed income, it feels like a constant battle against rising costs. It's stressful and it can feel pretty isolating. But today, we're going to look at a potential solution. We're diving deep into proposed legislation that's designed to give a real, significant financial boost to millions. So let's break down what these changes could actually mean for your wallet, for your peace of mind, and for your future.
Let's just start with the reality of the situation, right? This quote, wow, it gets right to the heart of the issue. $70. After paying for the absolute must-haves, that's what the average senior has left to last them an entire month. And that has to cover, well, everything else. A new pair of socks, a leaky faucet, an unexpected prescription, maybe even the bus fare to get to a doctor's appointment. That one number, $70, is exactly why we need to have this conversation.
So how in the world do we get to that $70 figure? Well, it all starts right here. $1,905. Now that's the average monthly Social Security benefit today. And it's so important to remember that for millions of people, this isn't just a little extra cash. It's their main, and sometimes their only source of income. And as we're about to see, that money gets stretched incredibly thin, and it happens fast.
Okay, so let's follow the money. Let's break down exactly where that $1,900 goes. It's easy to hear a number like that and think, okay, that sounds manageable, but when you start subtracting the non-negotiable costs of just living, a totally different picture starts to emerge. This is what we're calling the daily financial squeeze.
And here it is. This is where it all goes. Housing, boom, right off the top, takes the biggest slice at $635. Then you've got your essentials, right? Groceries at $300, but look at healthcare. A massive $400 chunk. That's for premiums, copays, medications, all of it. And once you total just these absolute basics, you're already at $1,835. And just like that, that's how we're left with that tiny $70 sliver for everything, and I mean everything else.
This chart really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? That huge slice, 96% of the monthly income, is gone before you can even think about anything else. It's spent on just staying afloat. And that tiny 4% sliver, that's what's left over. It shows a budget with absolutely zero breathing room, and it leaves millions of people in a state of constant financial anxiety, where just one unexpected expense can turn into a full-blown crisis.
But this is where the story starts to change. We've laid out the problem, so now let's turn to the proposed solutions. There's actual legislation on the table designed specifically to tackle this financial squeeze. Let's take a look at how these proposals aim to build a much more secure future.
So, the first big proposal is called the Social Security Expansion Act. Its approach is really direct. Put more money straight into the pockets of recipients every single month. It's not some complicated formula or anything like that. It's a straightforward boost that's designed to have an immediate impact. And this is the number at the very heart of the act. The proposal calls for an increase of $200 per month for every single Social Security recipient. And it's really important to get this. This isn't a one-time check. It's an ongoing monthly increase that would fundamentally change that budget we just looked at.
Now, to really understand the impact, let's just zoom out and look at that over a full year. An extra $200 a month? Well, that adds up to a whopping $2,400 every single year. For someone on a fixed income, that is a huge deal. I mean, think about what that means in real life. It could be enough to cover several months of groceries, or handle a major car repair, or maybe finally start building a small but absolutely vital emergency fund.
Okay, so the Social Security boost, that's one piece of the puzzle. The other is the SSI Restoration Act. Now this one is aimed at some of our most vulnerable citizens, seniors and people with disabilities who receive Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. For decades now, SSI benefits have actually been below the federal poverty line. This act aims to fix that, simple as that, to lift recipients out of poverty by law.
So let's break down exactly how it would work. First, the base monthly benefit would go up from $943 to $1,073, bringing it right up to the poverty line. But honestly, this next part might be the biggest game changer of all, the asset limits. Right now, an individual can't have more than $2,000 in assets. This proposal raises that all the way to $10,000. And why does that matter so much? It means people can finally save for an emergency, a broken fridge, a surprise medical bill, without living in fear of losing their essential benefits. It basically removes a penalty for trying to be prepared.
Okay, so we've got these two big proposals on the table. Now for the most important part. What does this actually look like in a real-world budget? Let's visualize that journey, from that near-deficit situation we saw earlier to a budget that actually allows for some real dignity and security.
This side-by-side comparison, it tells the whole story. On the left, you've got the before scenario we've been talking about. Income of $1,905, basic costs of $1,835, and just $70 left over. Now, look to the right. With that proposed $200 increase, the income jumps to $2,105. Necessities cost the same, but the amount remaining, it leaps from $70 to $270. That's nearly a four-fold increase in what's left over. It's the difference between constant panic and actually having options.
So what can you actually do with that extra $270? This gives you an idea of what a dignity budget could look like. You could finally start an emergency fund, right? Putting away $100 a month for when life happens. You could budget an extra $50 for healthier, fresh produce, something that's often the first thing to get cut when money is tight. You could afford to replace worn-out clothes or things around the house, and you'd still have $70 left for what we can actually call quality of life. You know, visiting a friend, buying a book, or just enjoying a meal out without feeling guilty.
And these proposals aren't just about an immediate fix, they're also about fixing the system for the long haul. They would adopt something called the CPIE to calculate future cost of living adjustments. What that basically means is it's a more accurate way to measure inflation for seniors, because it gives more weight to the things that hit them the hardest, like healthcare costs. This would help make sure that benefits actually keep up with what things really cost in the future.
You know, the impact of this kind of financial relief goes so much further than just a bank account. Having that financial breathing room creates a ripple effect that touches every single part of a person's life, from their mental health to their physical well-being. It really is about so much more than just the money.
And this really shows you the whole picture of that ripple effect. When that constant financial anxiety is reduced, it can lead directly to better health. People can actually afford to fill all their prescriptions, not just pick and choose the most critical ones. Having even a small emergency fund means a flat tire is just an inconvenience, not a complete catastrophe. And there's a wider economic benefit too. When seniors have a little more money, they spend it at local grocery stores, local pharmacies, boosting the economy right in their own communities. Okay, so we've covered the problem, we've looked at the proposed solutions, and we've talked about their wide-ranging impact. So now, let's bring this all the way back home, directly to you. How can you use this information when you're thinking about your own financial future?
So I really want to leave you with this question. Just for a second, forget the politics, forget the legislative process, and just think about the number, $2,400 a year. What would that mean for you? For your planning? Would it mean finally getting that dental work you've been putting off? Would it mean being able to visit your grandkids more often? Or would it just mean sleeping a little better at night, knowing you have a tiny safety net? Understanding what's at stake, what that impact could be. Well, that's the first step in advocating for a future with more security, more stability, and more dignity for everyone.
You know, we've all been hearing the chatter about another stimulus check, but today we're going to dig into an argument that says maybe we're all asking the wrong question. What if the next round of aid wasn't for everybody, but was laser-focused on the people who truly needed the most? I mean, you see it all the time, right? Is another $1,400 check coming? It's the question, and for a lot of people, the hope that just doesn't seem to go away.
But the analysis we're looking at today completely flips that on its head. It stops asking if we should send out more money and starts asking a much sharper question: who should actually be getting it? And you know, that one little change shifts the entire conversation from just a universal handout to a really precise tool for helping people.
So let's start with the big idea here. The financial struggle in this country, well, it's not a one-size-fits-all problem, is it? We're not all in the same boat. So why would we all need the exact same lifeline?
And the argument laid out here is super direct. It says, look, sending a check to almost everyone is just not the most efficient way to solve the problem. The real power could come from a targeted rescue mission for those who are really, truly struggling right now.
This whole thing really sets up a clear choice between two very different philosophies. So how does this targeted idea actually stack up against those big, broad stimulus checks we've all seen before? Let's break it down.
Okay, so on one side, you've got the way we've done things before. Broad, universal checks that went out to something like 85% of the entire population. And yeah, that came with a really high price tag, but on the other side, you have this proposed approach. It's focused, it's targeted, it goes only to low and fixed income folks, which means the cost is much, much lower and way more concentrated. It's basically the difference between casting a giant net and using a scalpel.
So, if we're going to get targeted, who exactly are we talking about? Who is in this group? Well, the analysis points to a pretty specific slice of the population that's facing the toughest financial battles.
The starting point is a number that's, well, it's kind of hard to ignore. 40 million. Right now, there are 40 million people in this country living in poverty. That is a staggering figure all by itself. But believe it or not, that 40 million is just the beginning. When you widen the lens just a little bit to include people who are very low income, you know, the ones living just a hair above the poverty line, that number explodes to about 100 million people. Let that sink in. That means for every 3 people you meet, one of them is struggling in a pretty significant way. All right, let's talk money, because when you actually run the numbers, the argument for being more targeted gets incredibly clear. So how do the costs really compare?
So check this out. To send a one-time $1,400 check to 50 million of the most vulnerable people, that would cost around $70 billion. If you expand that to the full 100 million people living in or near poverty, you're looking at about $140 billion. Now, I know, these are massive numbers, but context is everything here.
And here is where that context just becomes jaw-dropping. That targeted check for 50 million people, $70 billion. The last universal check that went out, a colossal $358 billion. The difference isn't just big, it's on a completely different planet.
Let me put that another way, because this is really the heart of the whole financial argument. For the price of that one universal check, you could send five separate checks to the 50 million people who need it the absolute most. Just imagine that. The potential for providing sustained, meaningful help is just, wow, it's on a whole other level.
But of course, anytime you talk about sending out billions of dollars, there's always that one huge question that hangs over the entire conversation, and that's inflation. What would this kind of spending actually do to the economy?
It's the critical question, right? Wouldn't pumping even $70 or $140 billion into the economy make prices spike for everyone? I mean, that's what a lot of folks think happened with the last few rounds of stimulus.
Well, the argument here is that it all comes down to how the money gets spent. People with low incomes are way more likely to use that money for immediate, essential needs. We're talking about groceries, keeping the lights on, paying for medicine, or just trying to pay down some debt. They're not running out to buy new TVs or book vacations.
So here's the crucial point. Because this money is going straight to essentials, to covering costs that already exist, it helps people stay afloat without necessarily overheating the whole economy. This analysis suggests the impacts on inflation would be negligible. That's a huge contrast to universal checks, which can definitely fuel widespread consumer spending and drive up prices.
And that really brings us to the final thought here. What we've walked through is a case built on some pretty simple math and really clear data. It suggests that by focusing our help where it's needed most, we could actually have a much bigger impact for a fraction of the cost.
So the question it leaves us with is this. Could this data-driven approach be the blueprint for how we handle economic support from now on?
Today, we're digging into a really big proposal that could totally change the game for millions of retirees in America. We're going to talk about what an extra $200 a month really looks like. And trust me, it's about so much more than just the money. It's about security, it's about health. Really, it's about dignity. Okay, let's just jump right in. See this number? $70. We're starting here for a reason. After you look at all the budgets and do all the math, this is pretty much what the average person on Social Security has left over every month after paying for the absolute basics. You know, $70 for everything else, a new pair of socks, a birthday card for a grandchild, or heaven forbid, an unexpected flat tire. It is a razor-thin margin, and it creates this constant nagging stress.
So check this out. The average Social Security benefit is about $1,900 a month. And you might think, okay, that sounds like you could make it work. But this table, well, it shows how fast that money just evaporates. A huge chunk, right off the top, goes to housing. Then you've got utilities, groceries, and then boom, a massive piece. We're talking over $550 gets eaten up by healthcare and prescriptions. And after all of that, what's left? Yep, that $70 buffer. This is the day-to-day reality for millions.
All right, so that's the problem. The big question is, what can be done about it? Well, that brings us to a major piece of legislation that's on the table, and it's designed to give people immediate, direct help. Let's take a closer look at the Social Security Expansion Act. You know, the idea behind this act is actually super simple. It's not some complicated new program you have to apply for or a weird voucher system. Nope, it's just a direct, across-the-board increase for every single person getting Social Security benefits. Whether you're a retired worker or someone on disability, the whole point is to get real, tangible help into your bank account every single month. And here's the magic number. The act is proposing a $200 increase every month. Now, to some people, that might not sound like a life-changing amount of money. But, as we're about to see, for someone on a fixed income, it is a total game changer. And remember, this isn't a one-time thing. That's an extra $2,400 every single year. Okay, so we've seen the numbers. But what does that $200 actually do in someone's real life? How does it change the decisions you have to make at the grocery store or when you're standing at the pharmacy counter? Let's break down that real-world impact. To really get this, I want you to meet Margaret. Margaret's 72 years old, and honestly, her financial situation is the same one millions of people are facing right now. She worked her entire life, she paid into the system, and now she's counting on that monthly check to get by. Her story is one of incredible resilience, for sure, but it's also a story of just this constant, draining anxiety. All right, so this is Margaret's budget today. Her monthly income is $1,650. After she pays her rent, her utilities, her Medicare premium, and her prescriptions, she's left with just $120. Think about that. That has to cover everything else. Transportation, clothes, shampoo, any emergency at all. And this is where she has to make those impossible choices, right? Does she buy the fresh fruit her doctor says she needs, or does she make sure she has enough for her copays? It's just a decision nobody should have to make when they're retired. Now, let's see what happens when we add that $200. Her income goes up to $1,850. Her main bills are still covered, of course, but now she can actually increase her grocery budget to buy healthier food, she can buy a new pair of shoes, but look at that